with a carpal tunnel syndrome. You know, their hand inflamed in the wrist, and it's usually the right wrist. It is the right wrist in a right-handed person. The left wrist in a left-handed person, if a person is using their hands equally, it'll be both wrists. See, there's a stress factor occurring with the use of that wrist. But I have always found that in the background of this is a food reaction. In all the carpal tunnel syndromes I work on, I could always isolate a food that could make it flare up as I fed it. Now, in my case, it was dairy products. And I had originally a carpal tunnel syndrome before I ever knew anything about magnets or anything about food. And my hand used to, every once in a while, I'd wake up in the morning with my hand turned like this, and I was getting a Dupuytren's contracture, we call it, see? You can still see the residual of it there. As my hand pulls like that, see? It was dairy products. So when I tested my food, my dairy, I had this pain in my wrist. And so there's two causes, you might say, for almost all these things. One is one that has prepared the tissues because they're in some kind of stress. The other is the basic inflammatory, something in the background, which is nearly always foods.
That all organisms have a multitude of roots, sort of like a locust tree that has different roots going out from one main root. And then does that mean that we have many crossovers or labeling mechanisms of disease? Say ADD, does it have similar symptomologies to other diseases, or does autism have similar things, or do we always have cause and effect, or what you're saying is that it's a holistic approach, a total organism that's malfunctioning in some way, or?
Yeah, here's a good example. ADD is a good example because so many people know a child or an adult who's affected by it. And virtually everyone in the United States is familiar that stimulant drugs like Ritalin are used to treat ADD. What they don't realize is that because a drug is used to treat a disease, it doesn't mean that the cause of the disease is a deficiency of the drug, any more than if someone had organophosphate poisoning because they were exposed to a pesticide, your option, you could just give them an antidote for the pesticide, but the more appropriate thing would be to remove them from their source of exposure to pesticide. And in that case is exactly analogous to how we treat ADD. ADD is treated with Ritalin without going into the biochemical reasons why there's a problem. And for example, one of the common causes can be lead poisoning. And if your child had lead poisoning, would you want the child just to be treated with Ritalin and not treat the underlying poisoning with lead? I don't think so. And so what I found is that there are many different causes of ADD. They can include food allergies, sensitivities to food dyes and food additives. It can include things like intestinal bacterial overgrowth, intestinal yeast overgrowth, exposure to other toxic chemicals or heavy metals. So all of these things, either singly or in combination, can lead to a condition called ADD or ADHD.
Okay, may I just play a little word association, free association word game? If I mention to you, Dr. Shaw, say, for example, sugar and oxygen, bacteria, fungi, and yeast, what do these mean in terms of metabolistic disorders that affect the whole human organism? In other words, does something start in one place and then we find that it affects something else, maybe totally at a larger distance from the body? If we have a stomach ache, does that mean we only have a stomach ache, or does that in fact indicate that we may have some problems going on with thought disorder or other types of illnesses?
Yes, that's a good question. What I've learned to think of is that a human is not an island. John Donne said, "No man is an island." Well, humans are integrated with the society, with the ecosystem they exist in, and that a human really is not alone. A human consists of a vast ecosystem in which there are huge numbers of bacteria in the intestinal tract. The number is on the order of 10 to the 15th, which means 10 times 10, 15 times. So you can see that's a very huge number. So in each individual, in their intestinal tract, in their mouth, on their skin, are huge numbers of microorganisms which coexist with the human being. And all of those microorganisms play a role. We affect what the life of the microorganism, and the microorganism affects our life as well. And when people started using antibiotics in the 1940s, they had a lapse of memory. So when they started using antibiotics in the 1940s, they were heralded as wonder drugs, magic bullets. And unfortunately, the thing that was forgotten in the use of these magic bullets was the fact that they affect our normal microorganisms, which are co-members in the human ecosystem. And not only do these antibiotics affect us, but they also affect the microorganisms even outside us. And after human use for a long period of time, they even alter the microorganisms that are external, that are in the environment, that are in other animals, for example, as a result of evolutionary processes. And the place where they're most important in the human is the fact that many of these antibiotics were so-called broad-spectrum antibiotics that killed many, many different types of microorganisms. And it was I think is very similar to the use of DDT in treating mosquitoes. Just like DDT was not confined to just killing the mosquito, it was killing insects of every other type, and then was being concentrated into the food chain, adversely affecting birds, marine animals, and finally humans. So the same thing is true with antibiotics. It's a very good product when used in moderation, when kept for very extreme circumstances, but when used injudiciously can cause havoc in the human being or in animals as well.
The actual concept, though, of sugar making an acidosis type of environment, do bacteria and fungi thrive more in an acidosis environment, or what's the reason for getting children or adults, all of us, off of what we would call white sugar, we need sugar for energy, so
right.
What type of sugar should we have?
Yeah, let me talk about sugar. That's an excellent subject. And there's one aspect of sugar that was widely known, and because that's widely known, I'd like to address that. At one time, it was thought that the actions of sugar that causing certain psychologic or psychiatric reactions to sugar were due to the hyperglycemic, the excess sugar produced. When eating refined sugar, the body would absorb it very rapidly. The high sugar in the bloodstream would then stimulate a massive increase of insulin. The insulin in turn would cause a dramatic reduction in blood sugar, so the person goes from a very high blood sugar after a sugar load to an extreme rebound effect when they had a very low blood sugar, and then that in turn, the very low blood sugar would cause one aspect of sugar that was thought to have played some role in the hyperactivity syndrome. However, the other aspect of sugar, which was completely ignored, was the effect that sugar has on microorganisms. All microorganisms can, virtually all microorganisms can utilize sugars of one type or another. As a matter of fact, that's one of the ways of differentiating different species is which kind of sugars the microorganism can ferment. It has been found that simple sugars were very important in the stimulation of a particular kind of yeast in the intestinal tract called Candida. In experiments that were done in mice, the mice were put on two different formulations in their drink. The one group of mice, a genetically identical strain, was put on plain water. The other group of mice was put on sugar water, and then the mice were killed after several weeks on the experiment, and it was found that the mice who were on the sugar water had over 200 times the amount of Candida inside their intestinal tracts compared to the mice that were on plain water, indicating that sugar has a marked stimulatory effect on yeast overgrowth. A physician in England, a Dr. Eaton, has found that essentially the same thing happens in humans. He found that in those who complained of chronic fatigue syndrome, he was able to do a very interesting test. What he did was to take these individuals and give them a load of sugar and then measure the blood alcohol shortly after the sugar load was given. And what he found that in a number of individuals that were given sugar, they would have a significant increase in blood alcohol. And by alcohol, I mean exactly the same kind of thing that you drink down at your local tavern. And they had this increase even though they were all sitting in the lab. They weren't being given a pint or two during this time period, but they had a significant increase in their blood alcohol after ingesting sugar. Then what he found out is if he put them on a sugar-restricted diet or gave them antifungal drugs for a period of time and repeated the experiment, that this time after the sugar load, the individuals did not develop this blood alcohol. So in other words, an antifungal drug which kills yeast prevented this, and the natural supposition is that the yeast were actually fermenting the sugar in the intestinal tract to produce ethanol, which could be measured by techniques such as gas chromatography. The same kind of thing has been reported in the literature periodically of individuals who seem to be habitual drunks, even though they really did not drink at all. And in those cases, that the same thing was happening. They had a more severe yeast problem and actually were fermenting sugar almost all the time versus not only just after the high sugar intake. So this aspect of the sugar metabolism really hasn't been addressed. So there was one study that purported to indicate that sugar did not affect behavior, but in that study they did not differentiate between individuals who had the intestinal yeast problem and those that did not. So that helped to invalidate the study because it appears that that the sugar only affects those individuals who have the significant yeast problem. It would not have this fermentation effect on individuals who had no or very little intestinal yeast.
Well, Dr. Shaw, if you just remove sugar, is that an assurance in any way that your child will recover from the difficulties, or are there bacteria that grow without sugar? Are there bacteria that grow without oxygen? Well, if you just remove something, will that make it better?
If that's what the problem is. That, as I mentioned, that's only the yeast problem is one of the possible factors in attention deficit disorder. Is definitely not the only factor. For example, some children with ADD have high amounts of certain anaerobic bacteria. These particular anaerobic bacteria are much more likely to grow in the intestinal tract following the use of certain antibiotics. Even though broad-spectrum antibiotics kill many or most bacteria, there's certain pathogenic strains of bacteria that are completely resistant to common antibiotics like penicillin and have a tendency to proliferate. And these bacteria can be very important because they produce compounds that simulate the effect of neurotransmitters. They produce compounds which are very similar to neurotransmitters, which are metabolites of the amino acid phenylalanine. Phenylalanine, amino acid in the diet, is responsible for production of a large number of important neurotransmitters such as epinephrine and norepinephrine. And when individuals have these abnormal bacteria, they can produce abnormal forms of these neurotransmitters that can markedly alter behavior.
Just a second, Dr. Shaw. If in fact we get to the behavioral side of things, are you saying then that the parents that reprimand their children for being hyperactive, such as ADD, are you making an excuse then for the child to get away with this hyperactivity behavior, or are you saying to the parent you're wrong, or are you saying the parent should try to seek out the proper information so that they would not have to deal with the behavior problem? And then I want to get into details because you touched on some extraordinary points in your book about leaky gut syndrome and the 6 different forms of IgE and the immune system, which I think are extraordinarily important. And I myself, there were many things I did not know, and I'm certain the audience did not know. But if you'll go back to the behavioral question of are the parents wrong for being human beings and being angry because their child is hyper 12 out of 14 hours of the day, and they go to bed at 11 o'clock, and they're 6 years old, and they've been kicking the door for the last 45 minutes? What do you do, you know?
It's not easy. It's a very difficult problem, and I think that every parent needs to examine all the issues. You know, am I giving my child sufficient discipline? Those kind of questions. But they also need to look at many of the warning signs that there could be biological aspects. And if the child has had a history of frequent ear infections, if the parents notice that the child's behavior changed after a number of courses of antibiotics, if the parent notices that the child, after eating certain foods, begins to have temper tantrums or becoming uncontrollable, if the child has certain physical symptoms that are very easily recognized, such as dark circles under the eyes, red ears, red cheeks, an anus that is kind of like a bullseye color, a nose that has a wrinkle in it due to we call the allergic salute from pushing the hand up against the nose. If the child has one or more of those particular kind of symptoms, it is a good sign that it's due to food allergies and very likely this intestinal yeast problem as well. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't discipline your child. You should discipline the child, but when the child does not respond to the discipline, when you compare notes with other parents and you find out that you're using the same amount of discipline as the other parent, but you're not getting the same results, you need to be looking at other causes.
Some children can create major disturbances in the classroom or at home. Have you seen them? Some children are too active after parties. Some children fall asleep after lunch. Some seem aggressive after gym or after eating. It is possible for you to determine why some problem children behave in this manner. Finding the causes of these problems is sometimes simple and easy. In this presentation, we shall limit our discussion to recognizing and detecting children who have unsuspected food or chemical sensitivities or unusual reactions to dust, molds, or pollens. With your help, some children may be able to learn better and act more appropriately in school and at home, so teachers can teach and parents can be pleased and proud. Before we discuss what causes children's inappropriate behavior, let's look at some physical clues that can help you recognize these children. Look at the ears. One or both may appear bright red. Children with sensitivities often have dark blue, black, or pink eye circles. They may display red, rouge-like cheek patches. Or some children have wrinkles on their noses or under their eyes. Others have bags under their eyes. Their legs may be restless or wiggly. What do these clues mean? If any of the above characteristics occur, singly or together, at the same time when a child suddenly misbehaves or can't read, write, or draw, that child could have an unsuspected sensitivity to something in his environment. Sometimes these symptoms occur in children who have typical asthma and hay fever. In other children, however, it's not the nose and chest, but mainly the brain which is affected by allergies. These children can develop behavior problems. If you suddenly see these changes, ask, what has the child eaten, touched, or smelled within the previous 30 to 60 minutes? You may have found an answer. Let's look at some typical children who have been diagnosed as having sensitivities and see how their behavior is affected. Here is a 4-year-old eating Jell-O. Here he is 1 hour later, and he has red earlobes. It's not his fault that he behaves this way at home or school. What would you do if a child acts this way shortly after lunch? Here is this child after he was given a dilution of food coloring to treat his sensitivity to food dyes. A colored breakfast cereal, beverage, or medicine could cause similar problems in this child. Wouldn't it be gratifying to be able to help a child who acts like this? When children are able to sit down and pay attention, they can learn at school and at home. Even wholesome, nutritious foods such as fruit, milk, eggs, or bread could cause unusual reactions in some children. Here, a 4-year-old boy eats a banana. During his reaction, we again see red earlobes. He could injure himself or others. Have you seen children biting their toys, books, furniture, even themselves? Have they tried to bite or pinch you or younger children? Parents and educators need to find out why some children act this way. If the cause is not found, 10 years from now, could such children become more aggressive? This particular child has been treated so that he no longer acts this way. How many children, however, have not found the right treatment? Can they become problem adults? Here is an 8-year-old who has just eaten 8 cubes of sugar. First, he developed a headache. Foods often cause migraines. Then he needed to go to the bathroom. Sometimes foods affect the bladder and make children have to hurry to urinate. Then he crawled under the furniture, threw his toys, and kicked his mother. Have you seen children change suddenly and hide under their desk or in a corner after they eat? Pollens, dust, molds, or odors can cause similar changes in some youngsters. After allergy treatment for sugar, he is again acting normally. Here is an older youngster who acts inappropriately. Here he is before testing. This is how he acted during his test for food coloring. He was asked to leave school at the age of 13 because he took off his shirt and could not conform to the school rules. Think of the price he must have paid because the diagnosis was not made earlier in his school career. This is how this 15-year-old acted after treatment. Shouldn't we try to prevent this type of school problem in other children? Some children's symptoms are displayed by sudden changes in their handwriting, drawing, reading, and arithmetic. Some children write sloppy, upside down, in mirror images, or with the opposite hand. Sometimes this is caused by what they have eaten or smelled. In general, if a child suddenly writes too small or refuses to write, he may act depressed, withdrawn, and not want to be touched. If a child suddenly writes extremely large, he's often hyperactive and too energetic. Let's see a few more examples. In each of the following sequences, you will be shown a sample of writing or drawing. The first sample shows the writing of a 4-year-old being tested for egg. This is an example of his normal baseline handwriting before the test. See the change caused by an allergy skin test for egg? See how large his writing became? At that time, his ears were red and he was too active. Here is his writing after his treatment. You see, it's returned to baseline size. If you see children suddenly act up, when their ears become red, does their writing change? How would this child write if he had 2 eggs for breakfast? Eggs are a nutritious food, but for some children, they can have a bad effect. Here, too vigorously. When children suddenly become angry and defiant while reacting to something, they may draw knives, draw blood, kicking or shooting. Some also write or act vulgarly. It is possible that children's actions, as well as their writing or drawing, may reflect how they feel. Children are often unable to express their feelings in words. By observing how certain children change before and after they eat, you may be able to determine the cause of some of their problems. So what have we discovered? In this hyperactive, depressed, fatigued, or complain about a wide variety of other physical problems. The common thread, however, can be an unsuspected allergy or food or chemical sensitivity, resulting in inappropriate behavior at home and in school. We have already shown that unacceptable activity and mannerisms can sometimes be treated.
All right, not really much different.
Here's a 17-year-old who reacts to an allergy skin test to grape and later on to ragweed pollen. She had no knowledge of what was being tested. Here she is pulling away from her mother's touch.
Dad, what's the matter? Don't touch me!
At that time, she says, "Please, God, I don't want to live anymore if I have to live this way."
This way anymore.
What did you say?
I don't want to live this way anymore. I wish God would let me die.
Here she is several minutes after she received the correct dilution of an
I get
allergy
very
extract
upset.
for grapes.
Cranky and crazy, and I can't even explain.
Similarly, when she reacts to an allergenic substance such as ragweed pollen, she crouches in a corner away from everyone, refuses to be touched, and later on she rocks back and forth. Have you seen children who act this way? Maybe there are ways to detect the cause of such problems earlier in a child's life. Children and parents should not have to endure this type of problem for years when it is sometimes easily corrected.